I went back in time and simulated an Ice Age ecosystem for 100 days. In this video, you'll see creatures face frigid temperatures, hunt for scarce resources, and reproduce in the hope of keeping their species alive. But will any emerge victorious, or are they all doomed to die? Well, to find out, we'll have to go back to day 1. On day 1, we introduced our first creature to our ecosystem. The quagga is an extinct subspecies of plain zebra that once roamed the grasslands and shrublands of southern Africa. The quagga was hunted to extinction in the wild for its meat and hide and to make way for livestock farming. But here it is very much alive, so I of course named them all up and enjoyed watching them settle in to their brand new environment. And to go with our quagga and give them some company, I introduced the Cindoceras. The Cindoceras is part of the family Proceratidae, a group of extinct hoofed mammals that were distantly related to the modern camel. The whole group were all given suitable names, which reminds me that if you want to be named after a creature in my ecosystem videos in the future, consider supporting me on Patreon, link in the description. I watched our new species battle for supremacy, and eventually Rick was crowned the winner, and would be the new alpha around these parts. The quagga were in need of some water, so they raced each other to the nearest water source, which after finding, they helped themselves to a well-deserved drink at. Life was good in our ecosystem for our quaggas, and it was now time for them to start a family. After a short while, the first baby of our ecosystem was born, and multiple baby quagga entered our ecosystem. I named one of them Adonis, and happily watched our quagga family enjoying settling themselves into their natural habitat. And our Cindoceras had also begun to reproduce, as our ecosystem continued to grow. Our new families all looked incredibly happy and comfortable, but that was about to change. You see, for an ecosystem to thrive, it's important for life to find balance, and thus it was time to lay the ground ready for a predator. The first Ice Age predator to be added to our ecosystem was the Equurus. This carnivorous mammal belongs to the family Mustelidae, which includes modern-day weasels, otters, and badgers. It was estimated to be around the size of a modern leopard, and estimated to weigh between 20 to 40 kg, which basically makes it a bit like my husky Merlin. But unlike my incredibly friendly husky, these predators were not to be messed with, and as I named all of them, they began to hunt. As the sun began to set, the Equuruses spotted both sets of animals in the distance, running around in the trees, unaware that they were being hunted. As dusk fell, the predators charged in, causing panic to spread amongst the quaggas and Cindoceras. While the adults were a tougher ask for the new apex predators around these parts, the babies represented nothing more than an easy meal, and it would be Ryan, the 1-month-old Cindy, who would be the first casualty of our ecosystem. I think out of respect, it's only fair that everyone pays tribute to Ryan in the comments below. And it was safe to say that our new additions were making themselves right at home. Not only had they made their first successful kill, but they had found themselves a home. A home where they would be able to reproduce, and soon we had our very own baby Equuruses running around, named Lala and Larry. These may not be the born killers of their parents just yet, but as the current apex predators of our ecosystem, they had nothing to worry about. For now. As the sun prepared to set, the pack left to hunt once more, but that night, on day 10, we would get our first snowfall. The creatures of our Ice Age ecosystem were well accustomed to these types of conditions, but there was no doubt that these harsh conditions could be challenging even for the most resilient of species. The snow continued to fall for days on end, and life had no choice but to fight on. And the snowstorm presented an opportunity to introduce our next creature to you all. This is the Megaloceros, also known as the Irish elk, and one of the largest deer to ever exist, standing at almost 7 feet. It lived roughly around 400,000 to 8,000 years ago, making it one of the more recent creatures to go extinct. Alongside, we also add the Hopliopteryx, a smaller deer with 5 horns, whose pronunciation I have surely messed up. With a pair above the eyes and a pair above the ears, and a single horn on the forehead, this was one horny creature. This configuration is unique amongst mammals, and they certainly seem to be enjoying using them to fight amongst themselves. While the rest of the creatures were battling the conditions out in the snow, our Equuruses had been happily riding the worst of it out in their cave, and our quaggas were continuing to expand their family as Annie the quagga fell pregnant. By day 15, the snow had finally stopped, which meant that the Equuruses were ready to emerge, and immediately went on the hunt. Or rather, however, maybe not. After hibernating away from the snowstorm, they were very thirsty, so they joined their fellow creatures down by the lake for a well-earned and very well-needed drink. They were still short of a kill, however, and after narrowly missing out on this baby quagga as it sprinted away, they rightfully decided against attacking the pair of Hopliopteryxes, who were in the middle of their very own dominance fight. And their problems didn't end there, as a new predator had just joined the ecosystem. This is the giant short-faced hyena, and it was about to turn this ecosystem on its head. They had positioned themselves right outside the cave, and while Mum and Dad the Echeuruses were out hunting, the last sole Echurus tried to defend both the cave and the babies. But they lost the fight, and had to slink off into the shadows on the cusp of death. The baby Echeuruses had one last chance to make a run for safety, as if they were cornered in the cave, they would have no chance. One barely made it out of the entrance before it was pounced on, but the other one successfully made a dash for safety. It looked as if it was all in the clear, before the hyena turned around and began to hunt it down. They would not be able to get away this time. It had been a rough day for the former top predator of our ecosystem, and to make matters worse for the Echurus, their cave had now been claimed by the hyenas. In one day, they had lost both their offspring and their home to the new king of our ecosystem. At the water source, our creatures gathered, completely unaware of the massive upheaval that had just happened not far from them. But in brighter news, Katie, our Hoploptermix, was now expecting offspring to bring into this dangerous world. Our Megaloceros were also enjoying their new environment and had found their very own water source surrounded by foliage for them to fill up on. One of the Echurus parents had finally made it back from the hunt, and they were about to realise that their home was actually no longer their home. As they sprinted into the cave, they came face to face with the giant short-faced hyenas who had stolen their home. The Echurus was forced outside of the cave where the fight continued, but the result of it was inevitable, with the bigger and more fearsome predator in the hyena winning once more. The Echurus lied down and accepted its fate. The next creature to join our ecosystem was a fair bit cuter. At least it looked it, at least. This is the Sardinian giant otter, and as I watched it run towards its new habitat, I of course named it Harry Otter, a nod to our ARC videos. This extinct species of otter would prey on fish, crustaceans, and other aquatic prey, and while it may look cute, you may want to be careful before getting too close to this thing. Our quagga had now given birth, and we named the offspring Aaron, but with some of the predators in this ecosystem, and more still to come, there was no guarantee that Aaron would reach adulthood. It was now day 20 in our ecosystem, and the temperature was gradually beginning to drop. But before the real storm could come, the rain came, which gives me a good opportunity to introduce our latest creature, the Macrorquina. This new creature resembled a mix between a camel and a llama, but was unrelated to either. Its long neck and legs suggest that it was adapted for reaching vegetation and travelling long distances. And they had quite the presence in our ecosystem, with a huge family, giving them strength in numbers. The rain continued to fall throughout the night, and by the time it stopped the next day, a new storm brewed. But this time, it was not the weather. This is the Smilodon. While it is often called the Sabertooth tiger, it is not actually closely related to modern tigers or any living cats. Smilodon species varied in size, but they were generally comparable to or larger than modern-day big cats. I named our Smilodon duo and watched them get accustomed to their new surroundings. But our Smilodons did not wait for long before making their first move. They went on the hunt. After working together to isolate one of our Macrorquinas, their running was just delaying the inevitable, and one pounce from our Smilodon was all it took. The Smilodons enjoyed a very hearty meal, and after finishing it, they appeared to enjoy relaxing in the trees and admiring the view, before returning to roaming the plains, safe in the knowledge that for now at least, they were untouchable. Our Hoploptermix had now had their first babies as well, who we of course named Bambi, because what else would you name a baby deer? And Bambi wasn't the only baby to be born, as our Megaloceroses had had their first offspring. The amount of herbivores in our ecosystem was growing rapidly, which was a small concern for the nearby vegetation. However, as we watched our baby deer explore far away from its parents, it accidentally wandered into the territory of something it shouldn't have. This is Rory, the short-faced bear, one of the largest terrestrial carnivorous mammals of its time. Unfortunately for Oscar, he had ran into the territory he did not want to be in. Rory would not tolerate anything outside of its cave, and when an easy meal opportunity presented itself, he was not going to turn it down. Rory did briefly explore the habitat outside of his cave to check if there were any other cheeky pests that had dared to enter his territory, but after not finding any, he returned to his cave, where he enjoyed a nice long nap after a hard day's work. Back by the water, our otter was having an absolute whale of a time still. After watching him for a little while, I witnessed our Syndoceras give birth to baby Daisy. The now quite substantial quagga family were also enjoying life, but that night, the hyenas left their cave and went on the hunt. As the hyenas approached the water, the animals fled, and the hyenas quite simply had the pick of whatever they wanted. Unfortunately, it was the babies that represented the easiest kill, and a dead deer was found. But the killing wouldn't stop there, as the hyenas chased a baby quagga into the water, and as it swam for its life, for a moment it looked like it was just going to get away. And then... The next morning, our creatures were still reeling from the night's events, but the parents were about to get justice for the death of their children, because there was a new killer on the loose. This is the Smilodon. Although this fearsome predator may resemble true saber-toothed cats like the Smilodon, it is actually part of a different evolutionary lineage, which are more like cats and has an impossibly long and hard to pronounce name. Living approximately 9 to 15 million years ago, this ambush predator likely relied on stealth and strength to take down large herbivores, possibly using its saber-like canines to deliver lethal bites to the neck or the throat of its prey. After naming all of our new predators, that night they went on an absolute killing spree, as multiple babies and adults bit the dust. Our new creatures appeared to be the most aggressive carnivores of our ecosystem so far, and it would take some serious force to stand a chance against them. But they hadn't been the only creatures in our ecosystem that had been very busy, as over in the far corner, the latest creatures to be introduced had been very busy indeed. This is the California beaver, and they had amassed quite the family, which gave me quite the conundrum, as I had to name all of these beavers individually. I watched my beaver population get to work, and as they destroyed the forest around them, they were building their very own beaver dam. Seeing them construct this and the final product was something incredibly special, but we now had a problem. The deforestation that the beavers had caused was a real problem for the health and stability of our ecosystem, and I could now not afford to keep demolishing our trees. We needed a new predator, as our Smilodon, despite chilling outside the entrance to the dam, didn't seem particularly enthusiastic for some beaver stew. So we decided to try something new, and that night, after watching the hyena den get flooded and forcing them to move out, we introduced the terror bird. But before we talk more about the terror bird, that night something was happening. One of our Smilodons was on the hunt and looking for an easy meal. Of course, as always, the weaker offspring represented the perfect target, and it wasn't long before the Smilodon had made a kill and was running away with her body. But as thunder struck above, I realised something. This was not one of our two original Smilodons that we had originally been introduced to. Our poor hyena was then forced to have her baby outside of her den as it had flooded, and I almost felt sorry for her, until I remembered that it was actually a stolen den in the first place. Checking back in on the beavers, it appeared rather than just cull the beaver population, I had created a massacre. The terror birds had wiped out an entire species in only one day, and I couldn't help but wonder what on earth I had unleashed on this ecosystem. Tensions that night between the Smilodons came to a breaking point. Fang, our new kid on the block, wanted to claim the territory rights to the hunting grounds currently occupied by our original pair of Smilodons. But after a tense fight, Fang would be forced to back down, and the old couple would keep control of the hunting territory. For now, at least. Out on his own, Fang would have to work towards a different path to the top. But for our original pair of Smilodons, the importance of winning the rights to the hunting grounds could not be understated, as the next day, they had cubs. Losing the rights to the finest deer hunting area in the entire ecosystem would have been extremely tough, as they now did have 4 mouths to feed total. I named our babies Jerry and Vicky and watched them sleep next to their mother. Over with our Megaloceros family, it appeared to be a relatively calm day, until that was turned upside down by the latest predator to arrive. This is the Quercylurus, an extinct carnivorous mammal last seen around 33 million years ago, and is another species that is often dubbed as false saber-tooths due to their similar looks. These new predators were not to be messed with, and were making numerous kills around the ecosystem, shrinking the numbers of our poor giant deer. The arrival of this predator caused our Megaloceros family to evacuate their home in the search of some more friendly territory. On day 50 and the halfway point in our ecosystem's life, our quagga babies had now fully grown up, and they were no longer small and cute. Instead, they were fighting for the alpha position of their pack, and with age on their side, they had a good chance. Our terror birds had now finished terrorizing the beavers and had decided to mate. The mother laid a nest and would protect those eggs with her life, and luckily Dad was happy to stay and look out for her. Our hyenas, who at one point in time were the apex predator of this ecosystem, were struggling to find where they fit in, as they were forced to abandon their territory as the Smilodon closed in. But when this baby hyena could simply run no more, and its tired little legs gave up, the Smilodon pounced. The mother hyena had no choice but to continue running in search of new hunting and mated grounds. And apparently this menace was not finished just yet, as later that day I found him walking away from a poor dead Harry otter. A very sad day for everyone. Please send your wishes to Harry in the comments below. After running from the Quercylurus, the Megaloceros family finally found themselves a new home. There was just one problem. It was bear territory. Rory came out of his cave, but instead of being met by a Megaloceros, Rory ended up coming face to face with another short-faced bear. At first, it was unclear what the dynamic between the two bears was going to be. Was Rory going to fight to the death to defend his territory, or could this possibly be a friend, or even a mate for Rory? Well, after some brief face-to-face action, the bears decided to share the territory and see what the future held for them. The Megaloceroses, who had been hiding away and watching the two bears, quickly realised that this was not going to be a safe environment for them, and they would have to keep searching for that dream home. Checking back in with our terror birds, the animal responsible for wiping out an entire flourishing species, we could see that they had now hatched their offspring, and the family was growing. But for these baby terror birds, danger lurked around every corner, and that danger was incredibly apparent as Fang entered the terror bird territory. In need of a meal, Fang was desperate, but while our baby would be easy pickings, the adult terror birds were not going to be easy prey. When Fang ran in trying to snatch her baby, the mother and father attempted to protect them, but Fang would not be denied this meal, as he ended up with a much bigger meal than he had originally intended on. The other terror birds attempted to flee the scene with the babies, but Fang was in a bloodthirsty mood. Despite already having made his kill, he was not satisfied there. First, he killed a baby terror bird who had been lost in the chaos that occurred, before taking down a second adult terror bird. The terror birds, who had been part of a massacre already, were almost entirely wiped out by a sole Smilodon in Fang, who retreated back up to his tree to sleep off his now very full stomach. And Fang was not the only predator that was on the hunt that night, as the Sansosmilus family were busy taking down both quaggers and Syndoceris, with Rick, the former alpha of the group, biting the dust. The next day, I visited our Megaloceros babies, who had now grown up and were fighting with the other males for the right to breed. In this case, Samuel would lose a dominance fight, and thus would lose the right to stay within the breeding grounds. The remaining male would have his choice of which females to breed with, and thus Susan the Megaloceros was soon expecting. That night, as it began to snow once more, Fang was still on the search for a mate. This search, however, led him into Sansosmilus territory, a dangerous place to be for any creature. However, nothing was going to stop Fang from finding his mate, and he took out both of the Sansosmilus and thus eliminated a species from our ecosystem. The quagga who the Sansosmilus had been preying relentlessly on were sure to be happy about this. While Fang was still looking for a mate, our ecosystem was in for a surprise that night, as the bears emerged from their cave, along with a special baby bear, who we will name Zog. The bears generally kept to themselves in this ecosystem, but with a new baby to feed, it was time to go on the hunt, and on their menu was pretty much anything that moved. It was a deer that would fill the wrath of the bears today, and after eating its fill, it would bring back the remains of the carcass for its baby. On day 75, the creatures of our ecosystem would wake up to continued snowfall, with no signs of it letting off. The Ice Age had now well and truly begun. The creatures were resilient even in testing conditions such as these, although all species were now going to be forced to adapt. For those with young ones, such as our Smilodons or our quaggers, they would have now extra responsibility placed on their shoulders, as caring for their family just got that much tougher. Up in the mountains, however, a new species was thriving. This is the direwolf, an iconic Ice Age predator. Closely related to modern-day wolves, the direwolf was much larger and robust, which combined with the fact that they hunted in packs, made them a truly fearsome predator for any creature to face off against. And for our herd of Megaloceros who had begun to migrate in search of a slightly warmer climate, they had inadvertently set up camp at the bottom of the mountain that the direwolves owned for themselves. As always, it would be the babies that went first, as our wolves picked off any of the outsiders that had strayed too far from their parents. The timing could not have been worse for our Megaloceros, who had just found themselves a nice abandoned cave to settle down in and potentially sleep away some of the harsher conditions. However, after the wolves stumbled across their cave, they fled as fast as they could, and for once, the wolves were happy for them to go. They wanted to make sure that no rival predator could take their home from them, as had already happened to other predators during this ecosystem already. After all, there were still plenty of corpses outside for them to snack on, even if it did now taste a little bit snowy. On day 80, we entered the final 20 days of our ecosystem journey, and we welcomed in the woolly mammoths. Perhaps the most iconic Ice Age creature of all time, the woolly mammoth went extinct around 10,000 years ago, although scientists are doing their utmost to bring them back. With their long shaggy fur and an underlayer of insulating wool to protect them from the cold, as well as fearsome tusks to protect them against any predators, these creatures were perfectly adapted to living in the Ice Age. And joining our mammoths was another woolly friend, the woolly rhinoceros. This species of rhino was actually more closely related to modern rhinos than any other Ice Age mammals, and likely lived a relatively solitary life or in small family groups, similar to their modern day predecessors. But to balance out this section of our ecosystem, we had to introduce a new predator. This is the Smilodon, a small predator that did not have the strength to take out the giant adults, but would sniff around for a kill of any offsprings that would balance out the ecosystem a little bit. Also added was the Smilodon, which was actually a herbivore despite the slightly menacing look. The smaller creatures of our ecosystem were now really struggling in the colder landscape. Only limited vegetation remained, and as they spread out in search of food, they would either become prey to many predators of the Ice Age or die to freezing. But for our direwolves, life was much better, as they used their cave that they claimed to give birth to direwolf puppies, and soon they would have to prepare to go out and hunt for them. The Smilodon was also on the hunt, and while mammoths and rhinos were off this small predator's diet for now, the smaller creatures of our ecosystem, such as our newly introduced Smilodon, were very much on the hunting diet. And it was now time for our direwolves to join the fray. A pack of direwolves would be a match for pretty much anything in this ecosystem, and with their robust physiques, they even had the ability to chase down the quickest and most agile of prey, such as this Megalosaurus, and then the kill was made. On day 85, the snow continued to fall, and the landscape had begun to significantly change. The water had begun to freeze over, and glaciers were formed. New pathways were now possible to new hunting grounds for our predators, such as the Smilodon, who was certainly eyeing this up. But one Smilodon was still searching for something completely different. Fang was yet to find his desired mate, and with his only other Smilodon interaction being the fight that he had lost to the older couple, his search had now led him to the outside of a bear den, and when a bear came out of his den and began to walk towards him, Fang fled. He would be able to take on most things in this ecosystem, but a short-faced bear would not be a good idea. However, a creature that might not be so lucky was Grogger, the hyena. In search of warmer territory, our hyena had accidentally stumbled into Smilodon territory. With baby Smilodons to protect, they sized each other up for a moment, and as our sole remaining hyena looked to slowly retreat out of there, the Smilodons decided they were not going to let him go, and Grogger was killed. When you have your own offspring to protect that would provide an easy meal to a hungry hyena, you simply cannot take any chances. The bears were now out of hibernation and in need of constant food to feed their cub as well as that, and they were back on the hunt. And on the ice, a poor mammoth had wandered too far away from the land, and the ice was now starting to break. As the mammoth realised what was happening, he attempted to get back onto the mainland, only for the ice to crack and fall beneath him into the water. Once the mammoth had entered the water, it was never actually going to be able to get out. Even a mammoth built to withstand the freezing temperatures of the Ice Age would be unable to stay alive in the freezing cold water for too long, and after treading waters for hours, it froze to death. And that night proved to be the coldest night in our ecosystem yet. Even our Smilodons were struggling to cope with the cold, and they found themselves in constant need of food to keep their bodies alive. The problem for them, however, was that up until now, the main source of their food had been the healthy supply of Macrorchina, but these creatures had now been almost completely wiped out by the changing climate. The Smilodon had been a fearsome predator so far in our ecosystem, but it was a reminder that only species that were able to adapt would actually have a chance of surviving. This quagga kill was the last kill that the Smilodons would make for days, and as the baby Smilodons cried out for more food, the mother, who had already been depriving herself of any food so that the cubs could eat, was no longer able to survive the harsh climates, and passed away alongside her children. It was a sad end for one of the most deadly creatures to ever walk the earth. However, our Smilodon duo and the cubs were not the only remaining Smilodons. Fang was still on the search for a mate, and on day 90, he finally found one. Fang had been searching for a mate for so long now, and he finally would no longer have to face the Ice Age all on his own. But before Fang could get the opportunity to reproduce and have some babies of his own, both he and his new mate would also succumb to Mother Nature herself, as there simply was not enough food to go around to feed them. Fang died on day 69, safe in the knowledge that he was at least no longer alone. However, all was not lost for every creature in our ecosystem. Despite the difficult conditions, a baby woolly mammoth was born, and this thing was absolutely adorable. I wasn't very alarmed to see it go for a swim at one point, although I guess it is easier to get yourself out of the water when you are so tiny compared to the adults that had just died in that water days ago. and the baby mammoths would have some friends to play with, as our woolly rhinoceroses had also had their offsprings. They were yet to develop the thick, fluffy coat of the adults, and they would have to stay close to their parents for warmth for the time being. The number of surviving species left in our ice age at this point, though, was minimal, as another creature in the Smilodon went extinct due to a lack of food options. Any creature that wanted to survive at this stage would have to be incredibly resilient, robust, and versatile. And on that note, I would like to introduce you to the final creature of our 100-day ecosystem journey, the Homotherium. Commonly known as the scimitar-toothed cat, this was a genus of the extinct saber-toothed cats that lived roughly 5 million to 12,000 years ago. Unlike the long, narrow canines of the Smilodon, Homotherium's saber teeth were shorter and more robust, making them well suited for slicing through flesh, which sounded like something that would help it stay alive in these conditions. And our new additions were about to come face to face with the direwolf army. Despite having these strength in numbers, the direwolves had never encountered a foe this fierce before, and after the Homotheriums entered their cave, the direwolves fled. However, they didn't flee far. The direwolves left the caves to help protect their babies, and despite losing one of them, they continued to hang around the cave entrance, hoping to intimidate the Homotheriums with the sheer amount of them. Perhaps surprisingly, this tactic worked, and the Homotheriums left the cave in search of some new territory, not long after claiming it. The direwolf army promptly claimed their cave back, and were pleased to have seen off the biggest competitor they would likely have to face. The next day, the Homotheriums arrived at a new hunting territory. They had one problem though. They were not alone. Across the half-frozen lake was a short-faced bear. The pair ended up coming face to face and attempted to claim the territory by scaring the other into retreat. Ultimately, with a den to defend and a baby back there was no chance that the short-faced bear was about to surrender, and after eventually accepting this, the Alpha Homotherium fled the scene. On day 99, after a continued hard trek through the mountains, they would, however, finally find a place to call home. It was a perfect-sized cave, and even with some natural water inside, this would be a great place for them to shelter from the cold and potentially start a family. And indeed, on day 100, that was exactly what happened, as 2 baby Homotheriums were born and came running through the crack into the cave. After 100 days, it appeared that our ecosystem had finally found some balance. As the curtain falls on our journey through 100 days of Ice Age survival, we've witnessed the raw power of nature, the resilience it demands, and the beauty that it holds. From battling freezing temperatures and facing ancient predators, to adapting to a harsh and unforgiving world. Thank you all so much for joining me on this frosty expedition. Don't forget to like the video if you have enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and share your thoughts and love in the comments below. Thank you guys for all the support this year in 2024. This is my last video of the year, so have a great Christmas and New Year, and I will see you guys all in the next one.